Hello, everybody. Hi, Brian Stoutenauer here, the lead child youth program coordinator with the Vermont National Guard. I am a contractor. We're here today with our special guest, Mr. Jonathan Catherman. Mr. Jonathan Catherman, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Hey guys, how you doing? My name is Jonathan Catherman. I'm a sociologist. My area of expertise is to study what's going on between generations, particularly with teenagers and their parents. And it's a really kind of a neat place. It gives me opportunity to work with everyone from professional athletes to military families. So I'm really pleased to be here with you today.
Right. Yeah, you've done some really great work with some military groups around the country, and we're super stoked to have you here in the state of Vermont helping us out and helping our teens and youth out. So thank you so much. We have you here today to talk about the 5 big changes deployment demands of the teens.
Cool. And I'm glad you used the word demands because demands are kind of an interesting thing. And yeah, when your family is undergoing a deployment, there are demands placed on you that exceed what are normally happening in a family. So let's clarify what a demand is right now. And by definition, a demand is like an urgent request or something that requires requires you to act now. And so it's not like you can say, oh, I'll get around to it later. It's pressing in on your situation today, and it needs to be addressed today. So when you say the 5 changes and the demands it places on the family, yeah, there's 5 big ones that go on with families when there's a member who's on deployment. It's happening, of course, for that family member who's away, but it's also happening back at the home. And so that's what we want to talk about with you teens. And you want to hear what the 5 are? Because I've studied this. It's pretty interesting to me. Growing up in the military, being a military teen way back in the day, wish I'd known this stuff then, but can I tell your teens now what they are?
Yeah, absolutely. It was super beneficial for me to hear about them from you. So yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so it's not complicated, and we're going to cover each one in its separate episode. So we'll keep this episode like to maybe 10 minutes, but let me share with you all 5, and then we'll work on focusing on the specifics of this episode. So the demands that families are facing, that teens are facing when there's a family member on deployment is the rules change, your routines change, your relationships change, the roles in the family change, and the rituals you have change. Those are 5 big demands. And something's kind of interesting happens when you face a demand. Now, Brian, I want you to think about this from a personal perspective. I'll do the same, and we'll have your teens consider it also. Okay. When we face a demand, something that requires you to act now, how do you tend to respond to that? Is that something you welcome, or is that something that you kind of like try to resist and push away?
Yeah, for me, it depends on where I'm at in that given moment, Jonathan, to be totally honest with you. I'd like to tell you that I welcome them all, but I'm going to be honest and say that sometimes I don't welcome them.
Right. And that's a really good point, because you got a really good point where you said it depends. And so everybody can relate to that, because that's the reality. When you face a demand, how you respond to it depends on quite a few things. And so let me explain to you what it depends on. And then when we face each one of these demands in these episodes, we can decide which path we're following when it comes to it depends, right? So here's the way it works. When demand faces you, your brain does this really kind of fascinating thing. It runs through this, what we call readiness assessment. And it says, okay, am I willing and able to face this demand? Now, if you're willing and able to face the demand, you take kind of a right turn path to something that your brain registers and said, man, I'm ready for this. This is really cool. I'm willing to take on this challenge. And the cool thing about our brains is they love challenges. In fact, when we face a challenge, we try to conquer it, and we want to take on a bigger and better challenge next time. That's how people got really excited about everything from, getting better grades to climbing taller mountains, how you perform in sports to how you practice and play your musical instrument. When you get better and your brain is going, this is great, we see it as a challenge, we thrive in that state. On the other hand, if we're not willing to face it or unable to face that demand, our brain registers it as a threat. We're not ready. And we all know what happens when we feel threatened. We try to avoid it, or we try to fight it, or we try to, flight it. They call it fight or flight for a reason. So when a family is facing deployment and your teens are experiencing demands at a new level in their home, the rules, routines, relationships, roles, and rituals change, their brain is literally saying, am I ready or not for this? Am I going to see it as a challenge or a threat? Are we going to thrive or survive? That's why this topic is so very important to you right now. So I want to ask your teams, shall we figure out if you're going to thrive or just try to survive this whole thing? Because deployment is a real part of your life. Let's figure out how you see it as a challenge to thrive in versus a threat to survive.
That sounds great, Jonathan. So stoked to have you help our teens and myself out as well throughout this.
Cool. So should we jump into the first of the demands?
I think we should jump right into that first demand for sure.
Okay. So the first one is the rules change, right?
Oh, the rules. We all love rules.
Oh, we love them. Well, when they go to our favor, we love them. But when they're like pressing in against us, maybe not so much.
Right.
So here's a kind of a model I want us to follow in all these 5 episodes. And so first thing we need to do is we need to recognize what the change is. So we need to name it and claim it. And in this case, it's the rules, right? The second thing we need to do is to face that change and ask ourselves, are we willing or unwilling to accept a change in the rules? And the third thing is we got to talk about the change, right? So my encouragement to teens that are watching this and families that are engaged here, who is a trusted adult you can engage, you can talk to about these demands? So in this case, the rules. So let's just talk about it for a minute. When the rules change, what are some of the biggest demands you're seeing teens face when a family member goes on deployment and the rules around the house change?
So for the youth here in Vermont, they're reporting that sometimes things get more restrictive around the household when one parent is trying to do both parents' jobs, but that means more restrictive rules in the immediate on the teens.
Nobody likes more rules. Like, man, where'd all these rules come from? Things used to be this way and now they're different and it doesn't seem fair. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the fairness factor in another episode, but I think it's important to acknowledge that the rules change, and often they don't get lighter. They probably get more restrictive.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we need to ask, are we willing or unwilling to face that? You know, like if a change occurs, like let's say, here's a rule that everybody has to face at some point, and unfortunately deployment forces it on many families, is the finances around the house change.
Yes.
So like when I mean by what does that mean have to do with rules? Because how much money we get to spend on stuff changes. Right. The budget literally changes, and a budget in a household is a rule. Like, I don't mean money rules your house, but you have to abide by a budget or else things get even worse, right? So teens, it might be a difficult thing to ask a parent about or an adult about, but it would be a good conversation to have, to say, you know, now that my mom, my dad is on deployment, what changes with our finances? Because I want to make sure that I'm understanding it. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to agree with it, but understanding is an important part. So just ask them about the money. You know, that's a weird conversation to have, I know, but better to have a weird conversation that's a little bit awkward now, that's even weirder and more awkward later.
Right. And I think it's probably important for the teens to express to their parents or the caregiver that's behind. They just want to understand it. They just want to know about it so that they can set parameters for themselves and help to be part of the process instead of against it. Right.
Right. You know, a bunch of things could change. I mean, curfews could change.
Yep.
What you get to do or not do after school can change. Online habits can change.
Habits.
Yeah, maybe here's one. Maybe the parent who's on deployment was the stricter of the two parents.
Ooh, yeah. Right? I've heard about that as well.
Right. And now the rules got looser. Well, don't abuse them. Right. So teens, be a good steward of the rules in your home. And this is a sign of maturity, that you are asking good questions and doing your best to understand. It doesn't mean you have to agree, but as you understand what's going on, because that means you are making informed decisions. So that you can, if you disagree with the change of rules, you have a conversation. You have some ability to have a conversation, or if the rules have been loosened up, you don't then step too far over the line.
Right. And I can see parents at first being put off by that. Like, why do you want to have a conversation about rules? Why do you want to have a conversation about finances? But I would think that in the long run, Jonathan, these conversations are not going to just help you personally, but help your interpersonal relationships with that family member, that parent that's at home. And that's going to get communicated to that service member that's deployed, and they're going to be be seeing and be hearing about that growth that you're taking on during these hard times.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. A lot of growth is going to happen in your life right now. This is called maturing. You're a teenager, you're no longer a child, but you're not old enough to be an adult. So it's kind of weird. It's like you're too big to be little, but too little to be big. And so you're kind of testing things out. This is where we mature in this stage of life. And unfortunately, the demands that are being placed on you maybe came a little earlier or a little heavier or a little more sudden than expected. But if your family member who's deployed is hearing how you're maturing while they're away, it's a huge ease on them.
Yeah,
and it's a great place for you to practice the steps you're going to be taking in the next few years anyway, and finances or curfews or the use of technologies, rules change. You're going to be the one stewarding those in the years to come. So now's a good and safe place to start practicing that.
Right. And remember, I'm guessing that we probably want to go into that conversation in a mature, calm way, not in a confrontational way, correct?
Oh yeah, just a conversation. Yeah. This isn't accusations. This isn't a debate where the problems don't need to be solved right now. It's just a conversation of learning more so that we can take proper and mature action. So
Jonathan, with these rules, I'm guessing that's going to bring up for me. I know when I was a youth, a teenager, that rules, new rules, different rules, changing rules always brought on some typically negative feelings. And sometimes I wasn't sure how to use those feelings in my conversations, or if I should use those feelings in my conversations with adults.
When we phrase, I feel, if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling concerned, if you're feeling excited, you're feeling happy, but that you phrase it with, okay, I'm feeling, and you express it without that being imposed upon someone else. So how I feel cannot be imposed upon you, Brian, right? But I can say, I feel, and then an explanation of that feeling. That's a very important part of the conversation, because we can have all these facts about how the rules have changed. Now, we can't deny that the family members on deployment. We can't deny that the finances maybe have changed, or that curfews have changed, or something has changed. But it's also important to understand how we're feeling about that change. So when you're talking to adults about how you're feeling about the change, make sure you kind of keep a little bit of them separate. Like, I feel, explanation of your feeling about the change, but try not to press that your feeling is someone else's fault. That's not going to go over well. We tend to put up barriers when that happens. And my feelings can change if I understand a little bit better and have some time to adjust. So I think, yeah, you've got to express those feelings. Just understand that the feeling is an emotion, whereas the rules can be more a fact. I mean, you can't really change that the budget's lower or that the curfew is earlier.
Okay, great, thanks. That's super helpful. Yeah.
Okay, so the rules changed, but we've got 4 more demands that are being placed, 4 more. And the next one's going to be routine. So that will be the next episode. So I hope that maybe this was a good introduction to the 5 big changes that we're all facing when a family member is deployed. First one being rules, second one's being routines. And we're going to cover that in the next episode.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jonathan. We'll see you again soon.
See you in a minute.